There are moments in baseball that statistics cannot measure. Not launch angles. Not exit velocity. Not WAR or OPS or any of the elegant numbers that analysts use to explain why certain players are better than others. Those numbers are real and they matter, but they have never once captured what happened in the seconds immediately after Shohei Ohtani took a pitch directly to his body and the opposing dugout fell completely, unexpectedly silent. Because what they witnessed in that moment was not an at-bat. It was not a data point. It was a revelation about character. And the man who said it out loud, the man who gave words to what everyone in that stadium had just felt, was the opposing manager. The man whose entire job description that evening was to stop Shohei Ohtani from doing exactly what Shohei Ohtani always does. He leaned against the dugout railing, looked out at the field, and said something that managers almost never say about the player standing in the other team's batter's box. That's MVP material. Not the home runs. Not the strikeouts. Not the impossible two-way numbers that have redefined what a single human being is capable of accomplishing in a professional baseball season. The reaction. The one that lasted maybe 3 seconds. The one that most cameras almost missed entirely. That was what made a veteran manager forget, just for a moment, which team he was rooting for. Before examining what Ohtani did, it is worth understanding what a hit by pitch actually demands of a professional athlete. At the major league level, a thrown baseball travels between 85 and 100 miles per hour. It is not soft. It is not forgiving. And when it makes contact with a human body, the forearm, the wrist, the ribs, it carries the full consequence of physics that no athletic conditioning program fully prepares a player for. Most hitters, when hit, follow a very predictable emotional sequence. First, the sharp intake of breath. Then, depending on location and severity, either an immediate grimace or the forced performance of not grimacing, which is its own revealing tell. Then comes the walk to first base, sometimes accompanied by a glare back toward the mound, sometimes accompanied by a word or two that the television microphones occasionally pick up. This is normal. This is human. Nobody blames a player for feeling what they feel when a baseball traveling at professional velocity finds their body without warning. What Ohtani did was something else entirely. The ball hit him. He registered it, that much was visible, because Ohtani has never been someone who pretends pain does not exist. He felt it. He acknowledged it physically in the way that all honest athletes do. And then, almost immediately, he smiled. Not the uncomfortable smile of someone trying to appear unbothered when they are clearly bothered. Not the performative toughness of a player who has decided in advance that showing pain means showing weakness. A genuine smile. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper than calculation. The kind that suggests that what just happened, the pitch, the contact, the sting, was simply one more small event in a very long story that Ohtani already knows is going to end well. He picked up his bat. He jogged calmly to first base. And the opposing dugout, which had been loud and competitive and fully invested in the at-bat just seconds earlier, went quietly, unexpectedly still. The opposing manager that evening was not someone who gives compliments easily. This is worth establishing because the baseball world is full of managers who say gracious things about opposing players in press conferences. It is part of the professional culture. A layer of diplomatic language that everyone understands is obligatory and therefore carries limited weight. What manager Robo said was different. It was not diplomatic. It was not planned. It was not the kind of statement that a media relations team prepares a manager to deliver before he walks into the post-game press room. It was the involuntary response of someone who had just watched something that genuinely surprised him. And genuine surprise, in a man who has spent decades watching professional baseball, is remarkably difficult to manufacture. He said it first to one of his coaches, quietly, in the way that people speak when they are processing something rather than performing for an audience. And then someone nearby heard it. And then it moved, the way honest reactions always move, faster and further than anything scripted ever travels. That's MVP material. 3 words. The kind of 3 words that only emerge when the person speaking them has temporarily forgotten that they are supposed to want the other team to fail. Robo elaborated later, when the cameras were properly positioned and the moment had settled enough to discuss. He spoke about what he had expected, what any experienced manager expects when an opposing star gets hit by a pitch. The flash of anger. The slow walk. The subtle message sent back toward the mound. He got none of it. What he got instead was a smile and a jog in a player who seemed, somehow, genuinely unbothered, not in the way of someone suppressing emotion, but in the way of someone who simply does not experience that moment as a reason to be bothered. You see that, Robo continued, and you understand why he keeps winning everything. It's not just the bat speed. It's everything else. Here is what makes manager Robo's words more significant than a single compliment from a single evening. He is not the first. Since 2025, something has been quietly accumulating around Shohei Ohtani that has nothing to do with statistics and everything to do with the way the people who compete against him talk about him when the game is over and the official language of competition no longer applies. Opposing managers have been telling versions of the same story for multiple seasons now. The story of watching Ohtani do something, sometimes something enormous, sometimes something almost invisibly small, and feeling the professional obligation to acknowledge it honestly, even when acknowledgement directly benefits a rival. This is not common. In professional sports, there is a natural resistance to building up the opposition. Coaches and managers understand, instinctively, that every compliment paid to an opponent has a subtle cost. It elevates the rival, which implicitly diminishes whatever your own team is building. Ohtani has somehow made opposing managers willing to pay that cost repeatedly. The praise comes in different forms. Some of it is about his preparation, the consistency of his routine across a 162-game season that would exhaust players half his age. Some of it is about his composure, the absence of the ego-driven volatility that follows most elite performers through their careers. And some of it, increasingly, is about exactly what manager Robo saw that evening. The reaction. The character embedded in the small unrehearsed moments that happen too fast for a player to consciously manage. It has been building since 2025. And the remarkable thing is that it shows no signs of stopping. To understand why Ohtani's reaction carried the weight it carried, it helps to understand something about how elite athletes process adversity. At the highest level of any competitive sport, the difference between the very good and the truly exceptional is rarely physical. The physical gap closes as athletes ascend the competitive pyramid. The players who arrive at the top of professional baseball are, almost universally, extraordinary physical specimens who have dedicated their lives to their craft. What separates the exceptional from the very good, at that level, is psychological. Specifically, it is the relationship each athlete has developed with adversity, with the unexpected, the painful, the disruptive, and how quickly they are able to return to their baseline after something goes wrong. Sports psychologists call this resilience. Coaches call it toughness. Teammates call it consistency. Ohtani simply calls it Tuesday. The smile after the hit by pitch was not a performance of resilience. It was not Ohtani consciously deciding to send a message to the opposing dugout or demonstrate mental strength for the television cameras. It was the natural expression of someone who has spent years building a relationship with difficulty that most athletes only read about in preparation books. His former mentor figures in baseball speak about this quality with reverence. They describe a player who has systematically eliminated the gap between what happens to him and how he responds to it. Who has done the invisible internal work, the years of dietary discipline, the obsessive preparation, the deliberate confrontation of physical and mental discomfort, until the response to difficulty is no longer a choice requiring effort. It is simply who he is now. The smile was not strategy. It was autobiography. There is a secondary consequence to the way Ohtani carries himself in adversarial moments that almost never receives adequate attention. It changes the people watching him. In a professional clubhouse, the emotional temperature of any given game is set, more than most fans realize, by its most important player. When that player responds to difficulty with visible frustration, the emotional permission to be frustrated spreads. When that player absorbs difficulty quietly and returns immediately to baseline, a different kind of permission spreads, quieter, less dramatic, but ultimately more powerful. Ohtani's teammates have spoken about this effect, carefully and consistently, for multiple seasons. Not in the language of inspiration, professional athletes are allergic to language that sounds like a motivational poster, but in the practical language of behavior change. Younger players describe watching Ohtani get hit by a pitch, smile, and jog to first base. And then describe noticing, the next time something goes wrong for them, that the image of that moment was already in their head. Not as instruction. As example. This is how the truly exceptional players elevate organizations rather than simply performing within them. Not through speeches or leadership retreats or any of the formal mechanisms that teams invest in for building culture. Through the daily, unrehearsed demonstration of the values they have actually internalized. Ohtani does not teach his teammates how to handle adversity. He simply handles it in front of them, repeatedly, until the standard becomes visible and the visible standard becomes the norm. Professional baseball has an unwritten rule about complimenting the opposition. You do it carefully. You do it diplomatically. You couch it in language that acknowledges the rival's excellence while subtly preserving your own team's dignity. You say things like, "He's a great player, you have to tip your cap," which means everything and nothing simultaneously. You do not say, off the cuff, with genuine feeling, that the player who just made your night harder is displaying MVP caliber character in real time. Unless what you just watched was so far outside the normal parameters of professional competition that the unwritten rule momentarily stops applying. This is what has been happening to opposing managers since 2025. Ohtani keeps doing things, not always the spectacular things, sometimes the almost invisible things, that temporarily override the professional instinct toward competitive restraint. Manager Robo's reaction was remarkable. It was also, if you have been paying attention, entirely predictable. Because this is the pattern. The excellent managers, the ones with decades of experience watching thousands of games, keep encountering Ohtani in these unguarded moments and keep responding the same way. With honesty. With admiration. With the involuntary acknowledgement that what they are watching is not just elite athletic performance but something approaching a philosophy of excellence made physically visible. They keep breaking the unwritten rule because Ohtani keeps giving them no reasonable alternative. The hit by pitch lasted less than 3 seconds from contact to first base. In those 3 seconds, Ohtani felt pain, processed it, responded to it honestly, and moved forward. No drama. No performance. No message sent to the pitcher or the dugout or the crowd. Just a man with an extremely well-developed relationship with difficulty doing exactly what he always does when difficulty arrives. He continued. Manager Robo saw it. The coaches around him saw it. The broadcasters caught it just barely, almost too late, before the next batter stepped in and the moment passed. And somewhere in the stands, in the press boxes, in the opposing clubhouse, in the watching rooms of every front office that spent that evening competing against the Dodgers, the same quiet conversation was happening. Not about the final score. Not about the statistics that would appear in the box score by morning. But about that smile. That jog. That 3-second window where Shohei Ohtani showed everyone watching exactly why the praise has been building since 2025 and why, if you have been paying close attention, it has never really stopped. The home runs are extraordinary. The pitching is historic. The two-way capability has genuinely never had a parallel in the modern game. But what manager Robo saw that evening, what made him forget, just for one unguarded moment, that he was supposed to be competing against this man, was something simpler and rarer than any of that. It was character. Displayed in 3 seconds. Without rehearsal. Without audience. And that, as the opposing manager said without planning to say it at all, is exactly what MVP material looks like.